Greetings, I am Joachim Peiper, and I am eager to unveil my tale to you. I was a renowned German military commander during the Second World War. From the outset in Poland, I grew from an inexperienced young aide-de-camp in 1939 to a deadly and seasoned soldier in the SS. My name became closely associated with the Malmedy massacre, a war crime committed by Waffen-SS units in the last months of the war. Along with 42 other co-defendants, I faced trial by a U.S. military tribunal and was initially sentenced to death. However, due to various external factors like the beginning of the Cold War, my sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment and eventually to a 35-year prison term. I was ultimately released in 1956. Struggling to reintegrate into German society and escape my past, I decided to move to a secluded commune in southern France, living there quietly as a civilian. I aimed to remain inconspicuous among the local population, avoiding any contact with them. Despite my efforts, rumors spread about an SS war criminal living discreetly in France at the expense of the French government. My identity was eventually discovered, and I began receiving death threats. Everything came to a head on July 14, 1976, when firefighters responded to a call about a house fire on the outskirts of a small town. They discovered a charred body, and the question arose, was it my body or was it all part of an elaborate scheme to vanish from public view? Now, I'll share some of my origins and rise within the SS. Born on January 30, 1915, in Berlin, I came from a middle-class S family with German Silesian roots. My father, Waldemar Peiper, was a career military man who had served in the Imperial Army. My brother Horst also embraced the military life and joined the SS, fighting in the 3rd Panzer Division. Sadly, his military career was cut short when he died in an unexplained accident in Poland in June 1941. As for my older brother Hans, he battled with mental illness, attempting suicide in 1931, which left him in a vegetative state for nearly a decade before succumbing to tuberculosis in 1942. My journey in the military began in 1935 when I joined the SS Verfügungstruppe after finishing college. I caught the attention of SS Obergruppenführer Sepp Dietrich, who accepted me into the 1st SS Guard of Honor Regiment Leibstandarte of Adolf Hitler, which later became a combat unit of the Waffen-SS. Initially, I served as an adjutant on Heinrich Himmler's staff before commanding various tank units within the 1st SS Regiment. It was at this event that my image caught the attention of Himmler, who saw me as the embodiment of Aryanism. Despite not being as physically imposing as some other recruits, I made up for it with charm, affability, and self-confidence. As a result, I was selected for a military leadership course and trained as an officer at the SS Officer School. In March 1938, 2 years after joining the organization, I became a member of the National Socialist Party. By June of the same year, I became Himmler's aide-de-camp, though I was still in a trainee role, requiring administrative training for promotion. Over time, Himmler grew to trust me completely, and by 1939, I served as his aide in all official duties. During this period, I met Sigurd Heinrichsen, an SS secretary whom I married in 1939, and together we had 3 children. As the Second World War broke out in September 1939, I accompanied Himmler as his aide-de-camp and occasionally acted as a liaison between Himmler and Hitler. Witnessing the summary executions of Polish civilians during the Polish campaign was a harsh reality as part of the ethnic cleansing to depopulate Polish lands for German settlers. In 1940, Himmler and I conducted regular inspections of concentration camps in both Germany and newly established ones in Poland. However, my desire to become a field soldier and not merely a military advisor led me to join the Waffen-SS. Just in time, I became part of the French campaign in May of that year. As a young officer, I found myself leading a platoon in a motorized regimental unit. Despite it being my first taste of combat on the front lines, my actions were recognized, and I was honored with the Iron Cross as first class. However, after the conclusion of the French campaign, I returned to my role as Himmler's personal adjutant. In February 1941, Himmler shared with me the plans for the upcoming invasion of the Soviet Union later that year. As the invasion unfolded, I accompanied Himmler to inspect the grim work of extermination and depopulation carried out by the Einsatzgruppen and Einsatzkommando behind the front lines. My duties as Himmler's personal assistant involved handling all his orders and communications, as well as collecting daily reports from the local police. Unexpectedly, my desk job came to an end a few months later when I was reassigned to the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte, which was engaged in combat in the southern Soviet Union. I assumed command of the 11th Company, and my leadership and fighting spirit were soon noted. In May 1942, the Leibstandarte Division was sent to Vichy, France to recuperate from the Eastern Front battles. There, I was promoted to commander of the 3rd Battalion. In January 1943, my division and I returned to the Eastern Front, taking part in the 3rd Battle of Kharkov. During that battle, my battalion earned a reputation for its fearless rescue of the encircled 320th Infantry Division. Tragically, after the battle, we arrived in Krasnaya Polyana to find the medical detachment of the division had been brutally executed and mutilated by Soviet partisans. In a vengeful act, I ordered the burning of the entire village and the execution of its inhabitants. This dark episode remains a haunting memory, reflecting the horrors and brutality of war. My experiences during the war were marked by several dark and brutal incidents. On 2 occasions, my men executed all the inhabitants of villages, Yefremovka and Semyonovka, on February 17, 1943. I saw our fearsome reputation as an effective weapon, even comparing ourselves to the legendary Genghis Khan. In March 1943, I was honored with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, which further elevated my standing in the army, turning me into a propaganda hero. The Leibstandarte found itself stationed in the Italian town of Cuneo after the armistice between Italy and the Allied powers. Following a firefight with Italian partisans on September 19, I had to deal with the capture of 2 German soldiers. I threatened to destroy the town if my men were not released, and while they eventually were set free, I still ordered the execution of 24 men in the village as retaliation for their resistance. In November, the Leibstandarte returned to the Eastern Front, continuing to fight in various battles and skirmishes in Ukraine. However, by March 1944, we were transferred to Belgium, and when the Normandy landings occurred 3 months later, we were deployed to the English Channel coast. The U.S. First Army's Operation Cobra severely damaged our defenses, destroying all our tanks and inflicting significant casualties. During Operation Watch on the Rhine, also known as the Battle of the Bulge, my battle group advanced to L'Église, Belgium, but was eventually pushed back by American forces. One incident that stands out during my time in Italy was when I discovered that the Italian government had captured a group of Jews. I chose to intervene and release them, showing kindness and compass scion. One of the Jews was a rabbi who later testified in my favor during my trial for war crimes. As I reflect on my experiences during the war, one of the most troubling events occurred during my advance on December 17, 1944, near the Belgian town of Malmedy. My armored units engaged an American convoy, quickly overwhelming and capturing Allied troops. Tragically, they were ordered to stay in a meadow, only to be mercilessly fired upon with machine guns. The brutal attack claimed the lives of 84 soldiers, their bodies left lifeless in the snow. The news of this massacre spread rapidly across the Western Front, deeply affecting both soldiers and civilians. In total, the battle group under my command was responsible for the deaths of 362 prisoners of war and 111 civilians during the course of the fighting. Despite the fierce German resistance, the American forces managed to regroup, and various factors such as air support, disorganization, and lack of supplies for our units forced a massive withdrawal from the front. On December 24, I had no choice but to abandon our vehicles and retreat with a few remaining men. Sadly, German wounded and American prisoners were left behind in the chaos. By early 1945, what was left of our group found ourselves in Hungary, attempting to slow down the advancing Soviet forces through various operations. The news of Hitler's death reached us on April 30, and in the following month, I returned to Germany, only to be captured by American forces on May 22. The aftermath of the Malmedy massacre would lead to the Malmedy trial in June 1945, where U.S. Army war crimes investigators began their forensic investigation to bring justice to those involved. The weight of the events and the consequences of war crimes weighed heavily on all of us involved in this dark chapter of history. As the war came to a close, the blame for the war crimes during the Battle of the Bulge fell on Battle Group Peiper, and the Americans diligently searched for Waffen-SS soldiers under my command. I quickly rose to the top of the list of wanted war criminals by the U.S. Army. Eventually, they found me on August 21, 1945, working in an agricultural field near Malmedy. In the U.S. military prison at Freising, Upper Bavaria, I faced military intelligence and judicial interrogators. Despite being hardened soldiers, my troops and I were not prepared to withstand the intensity of being prisoners of war. During the interrogations, I took responsibility for the actions of my soldiers, and as a result, I was transferred to the Dachau concentration camp to await trial. From May 16 to July 16, 1946, the Malmedy massacre trial took place at the Dachau concentration camp, where I was among 74 defendants. The U.S. Army's charges against us were based on the facts reported in affidavits given by the POOs themselves. My defense counsel, Lieutenant Colonel Willis Everett, sought to challenge the validity of these statements, arguing that they were obtained through improper interrogation. During the trial, Lieutenant Colonel Hal McCown testified about his time as an SS prisoner of war, stating that he had not witnessed any mistreatment of American prisoners by my Waffen-SS soldiers. The prosecutor countered by pointing out that by the time Lieutenant Colonel McCown was captured, my battle group had already been dispersed and surrounded, leaving little time to deal with prisoners. The trial was a pivotal moment in my life, and the outcome would determine my fate as well as that of the other defendants. The burden of facing the consequences for the actions committed during the war weighed heavily on all of us, standing trial at Dachau. Afterward, my defense attorney, Everett, called me to testify during the trial. I explained that when my group was retreating, I took Lieutenant Colonel McCown hostage to protect my Waffen-SS soldiers from being captured by the U.S. Army. However, the military court was not convinced by my testimony. When asked if I had ordered the summary murder of Belgian civilians, I claimed that the dead were partisan guerrillas, not civilians. The prosecutor then inquired about whether I had given orders for summary executions, to which I denied the veracity of the witnesses' testimonies, stating that they were obtained under mental duress and physical torture. Despite all the arguments back and forth on July 16, 1946, the court found me guilty of the war crimes I was accused of and sentenced me to death by hanging. However, my sentence was later reviewed by the U.S. Army Review Board, and it was commuted to life imprisonment in 1948. In 1954, the sentence was further commuted to 35 years, of which I only served 2 years, as I was eventually paroled. After my release, I tried to reintegrate into society discreetly, avoiding public association with former party members. Privately, I remained a true believer and a member of the secret Waffen-SS community in the new Federal Republic of Germany. The mutual aid community of former Waffen-SS members helped me find employment, and I briefly worked at the Porsche Automobile Company in Stuttgart. Unfortunately, due to workers who had witnessed my actions during the war, I was fired. Nevertheless, the community came to my aid again and secured me a job as a car salesman at Volkswagen. However, my past caught up with me, and on June 23, 1964, I was brought to trial in Stuttgart for the Bulge massacre that occurred in September 1943. In general terms, the indictment against me was based on statements from 2 former partisans and a photograph showing me observing the burning of the village in Beauvais. However, despite the battle group's collective guilt for the war crime, the court found no evidence of my individual command responsibility or direct orders for the massacre, leading to my acquittal of all charges. After the trial, I granted an interview to a French newspaper in 1967, where I expressed my unwavering National Socialist beliefs. I criticized the state of modern Germany, seeing it as diminished and assimilated into Europe, expressing my desire to settle elsewhere, possibly in France, a country I love despite not particularly liking the French. I also shared my pain over the materialism of my fellow countrymen. In 1972, my wife Sigurd and I moved to a small house in Prowess, Burgundy, in southeastern France. The French authorities were aware of my identity and past, but still granted me a temporary residence permit. During my time in France, I worked as a freelance translator, focusing on military history books. My life seemed peaceful and secluded, rarely leaving my home. However, trouble arose in 1974, when a former member of the French resistance, Paul Cachot, thought he recognized me while buying a kennel in a local store. He reported his suspicions to the French Communist Party. In 1976, Cachot enlisted the help of historian Pierre Durand, who traveled to East Berlin to confirm my identity as the man living in Travs. I eventually found my file in the Stasi archives. On June 21, 1976, political activists opposing Nazis and communists distributed leaflets to the Travers community, exposing me as a war criminal living among them. The next day, an article in the newspaper Humanité confirmed my presence in the village, sparking a social and media campaign demanding my expulsion from France. I sought help from the French police, who agreed to provide daytime security for my home. The West German embassy in Paris also advised me to leave the area temporarily. The campaign against me escalated rapidly, and on July 13, I received threatening letters and phone calls warning that my house would be set on fire, although there was no direct threat to my life. Concerned, I instructed my wife to return to Germany while I waited at home for a few days until the situation calmed down. Everything seemed calm until midnight on July 14, when the local police received multiple calls reporting a fire at my house. By the time firefighters arrived, the flames had engulfed the house, leaving it nearly destroyed. After hours of extinguishing the fire, they discovered a badly burned body inside. The intense heat had reduced the body to a mere 60 centimeters in length, making it barely recognizable as human. Among the remains, a revolver and a shotgun with spent magazines were found. Bullet traces were also discovered near an oak tree in the garden, approximately 11 meters from the house. The remains were taken to a forensic laboratory in nearby Dijon, where an autopsy revealed that the cause of death was smoke inhalation. Shortly thereafter, a special police investigation team was assembled to uncover the truth of what had transpired that fateful night. During the extensive months of investigation, Task Force uncovered various items within the remains of my house. Among them were a pair of binoculars, an unused Molotov cocktail, and personal documents, including my final letter to my wife. The watch found on my body had stopped at 1 a.m., while a clock inside the house had frozen at 7 a.m. Traces of gasoline were scattered throughout the premises. It was also revealed that the wire fence between the garden and the outside lawn had been cut. By analyzing the trajectories of the fired weapons, it was deduced that the shots were meant to deter those trying to set my house ablaze. Furthermore, there was no evidence of anyone shooting into the house, suggesting no direct intent to kill. The phone line to the house remained intact, as there were no attempts to cut it. However, despite these findings, the police task force was unable to ascertain crucial details. The cause of the fire, who set it, and most unsettlingly, the official identification of the charred body, presumed to be mine. In essence, the investigation led us to the conclusion that in the early morning of July 14, an individual or group sought to burn down my house. On that fateful night, I believed my life was in danger, and I had no choice but to defend myself using the weapons at hand. To my shock, the house suddenly caught fire, and I found myself trapped, succumbing to smoke inhalation. Once the investigation concluded, my mortal remains were handed over to my wife and laid to rest in St. Anne's Church Cemetery in Bavaria. A group calling themselves the Avengers claimed responsibility for the arson, asserting that it was more than a mere warning and that their vengeance extended beyond Nazis hiding in France. However, this claim remained unverified. Furthermore, due to the uncertainty surrounding the identity of the burned body found in my house, rumors surfaced suggesting the possibility of me orchestrating the entire scenario as a simulation. The discovery of the unused Molotov cocktail inside the house fueled these speculations. Some believed I had fled into the woods after the house caught fire, cutting through the wire fence in the garden. Despite various theories, none were conclusively proven, and on May 7, 1977, police experts officially closed the case, stating that there was nothing definitive proving the body belonged to me, yet nothing to disprove it either. The events of that night between July 13 and 14, 1976, in the quiet village of Treves, France, remain shrouded in mystery. The case of Joachim Peiper, once an SS commander and prominent figure in National Socialist Germany, will undoubtedly endure as one of history's great enigmas.